Do you want to know the most efficient way to find financial success? Keep listening to find out. Welcome to the Money Meets Medicine podcast, where we talk all about the personal finance topics you wish you had learned in medical school. I'm your host, Justin Harvey, and here is your co-host, who wears the same t-shirt in different colors 90% of the time, Dr. Jimmy Turner.
I said I was going to get rid of this from last week's show, but I decided to keep it because it's just so germane to what we're going to talk about on this episode. I'm a big believer in decision fatigue, and people are like, oh, I can multitask. Like, nobody multitasks. It's called task switching. And the more often that you do it, the more fatigued you get. And we all know what that feels like. And I'm going to be honest with you, Justin, have you noticed this? One of the times that I feel like I get the most decision fatigue or like that task switching fatigue is when I'm on my cell phone the most. Because like I'm trying to have a conversation, like pretending to do that or something, like being on my phone or like checking an email and like the 2 seconds that I have to do something. I feel like I pull my email when I'm stopped at a stoplight. I'm like, all right, this has gotten bad. Like I used to take email off my phone completely, but I feel like cell phones, like t-shirts are one thing, but I feel like, by the way, I do have the same t-shirt in 9 different colors and I definitely wear them like 95% of the days that I exist at this point. But yeah, the decision fatigue for me is very real. I feel like my head hurts when I'm on my cell phone too much.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because I observed in myself this compulsive. For the last episode, Jimmy, when we were wrapping up and you were going into your little, okay, thanks for joining us this week. I found myself picking up my phone and looking at it, and then I put it back down. And in that moment, I thought, what am I doing? I couldn't wait until Jimmy finished the end of his outro in order to address my technological curiosity. It was so, dude. I'm right there with you.
I mean, it's a thing.
It's embarrassing, honestly.
No, but so every decision that we make, every task that we switch, it has a mental drain on us. There's a certain amount of energy that's required, and people have long recognized this. Like this is the reason that Steve Jobs famously wore the same black turtleneck that he always wore, and same Zuckerberg I think does the same thing. It might seem like a small thing, but every single little decision that you make, the more often you have to make them, the more fatiguing it becomes. And so in this show, we're going to talk about how to automate things, how to minimize your financial energy, how to maximize your efficiency. And I think it's a really cool topic that's not often talked about enough on the show. As we dive in, don't forget you can get your free copy of the Physician Philosopher's Guide to Personal Finance or give that to all of your residents, fellows, and early career attendings that you know at moneymeetsmedicine.com, where you can also snag your own occupation disability insurance quote. We're happy to help you out there. Look over a policy that you currently have and or help you get quotes for the policies that exist in your situation. So, Justin, let's dive in. This was your idea, so I'm just gonna hand it off to you and see where you want to go with this bad boy.
Yeah. So I think, Jimmy, you're gonna enjoy today's discussion because we can address your philosophical roots and sort of get into what it means to be human and sort of.
I'm all about it.
Understanding how to be operating as your best self and in the way that you want to be. And one of the things, as we think about decision fatigue and as we think about financial progress, it's not just how do we like make less decisions, but figuring out what are the important decisions to make. And even thinking about how do we, like, what are the things you pay attention to? What are the things you focus on, the things you spend your time on? It gets to the most fundamental part of, really it becomes your identity. And we don't need to go all the way to the foundation here, but the point is, taking whole categories of financial consideration and removing them, not as like, oh, I'm going to only make one decision at a time, or I'm going to try to minimize, but like I'm literally going to make a decision about not making any decisions about this category of thing and use the bandwidth that is freed up by that. And also the positive impact of not messing with it. And I'll use an example to make this concrete. I'm not going to spend time day trading any stocks. I don't have to think, is Google going to be better than Apple, going to be better than Nvidia? Are there some small cap sleepers? Should I be looking at Bitcoin miners? Should I be looking at whatever type of company or whatever sector? By saying, you know what, I'm going to espouse an investment process that is VTSAX and chill, as it were, or something similar that's going to be low cost, fully diversified, pretty tax efficient. And I'm not necessarily saying you should do that, dear listener, although you'd probably be better if you're one of those day trading people. You would be better off if you did, almost certainly, statistically speaking, at least. But whenever you make that decision, you're not saying, okay, I'm now going to whenever I'm doing my stock research, I'm only going to do X, Y, Z, and then I'm going to put that aside. And then I'm going to do it. No, you're saying, I'm not even going to spend any of my decision energy or emotional energy or the time in my day trying to make decisions like that. I'm going to buy the index and I'm going to move on with life. There's a number of areas in which you can make a similar decision to not make a decision. You're deciding there's zero decision energy that's going to be exerted in this area. And you're also in the process, you're espousing an approach that statistically speaking is going to improve your likelihood of success. And you're having the dual benefit of freeing up your time and energy to do something else.
The way that I've always viewed that is this is the one decision that will make all the decisions. And so, which really frustrates me in medicine, by the way, just as a complete tangent, it really drives me crazy when we have to have committees and meetings about meetings to make decisions, when it's like, if we just sat down and we decided like, these are our 5 core principles for our department or institution, whatever the purview is for the decisions being made. And then you put those stakes in the ground. He said, everything that we decide from here on out is going to be looked at through these lenses, these 5 principles. And then the decisions make themselves. And index funds are a great example of that. Like, you just decide from the onset, hey, I've done my research. I've listened to enough podcasts. I've read enough books. Low cost diversified index funds just make sense for 1,000 reasons. And because you made that one decision, you never have to have that, that itch you have to scratch to go see if Amazon's doing better than Google is doing better than Nvidia. If I want to scratch that itch, it's called fantasy football, and I'm going to look up individual players. I'm going to decide, I think that this one's going off, or hey, I think this tight end's better than that tight end, or I'm going to make a trade with a buddy of mine from work that's in my fantasy football league. There are other ways to scratch that itch that feel the same that aren't day trading. And so I like the concept of making one decision that makes all of the decisions.
You bring up a great point, and I think I might have alluded to it on this podcast somewhat recently as I was listening to the audiobook of the Walter Isaacson biography of Elon Musk. And a very interesting story in a lot of ways. But one of the things that struck me, he's a guy who runs several complicated technical businesses in different areas of sort of technology simultaneously. But he does have these kind of like an operating system, the core principles. And there were a number of accounts where they're trying to solve a complicated technical problem. And he goes back to, okay, what is the core principle that applies to this question? And one of them that I thought was funny, but was so embodying his personality, was there are no laws except for the laws of physics. So it's like, NASA regulations say that we can't, yada, yada. It's like, no laws except for the laws of physics. Like, if we can do it cheaper and use the part from the car washing machine instead of the part that is tested 74 ways to Sunday that costs $120,000 instead of this $37 washer that, is used in industry here. Like, we're going to use the thing that is used in industry, and we'll let NASA or the regulatory body come and sue us, and then we'll fight them, and then we'll show them that their idea is dumb. That was kind of his MO.
Yeah.
And in so doing, so many decisions made themselves because of the core principles that were laid at the outset.
Yeah. And I think that you can take that idea and bring it back, which is the part of finance that I love talking about, which is behavioral finance, right? So why are index funds, outside of the unbelievably strong evidence for why they're better than active management, like psychologically, why are they appealing? It's not just because they do better. It's appealing because it's so simple, it's easy to ignore. And it turns out that when things are not hard or not easy to ignore, you check on them more often, you're more likely to sell them, you're more likely to do things with them. There's also the analysis paralysis and decision fatigue that comes from, okay, great. All right, your job's to go pick 37 stocks, right? And there are thousands of them, right? So now you're going to spend all this time trying to pick the 37 right stocks, and the amount of mental capacity and decision fatigue that goes into that. There's something to be said about simplicity, right? And index funds, not only are they better in terms of returns based on lots and lots of studies, they're also simpler, and there's a lot less decision fatigue. And it is the one decision that makes all the other decisions for you. And so there are just so many behavioral finance reasons that it is fortunate that index funds are what they are.
And related is, as you're thinking about the areas in which you're going to exert mental energy, thinking about, am I even asking the right questions? Like, what kind of investment is the right investment for me? Like, is that a question that is a good kind of question to ask? And I think, that is a good question, but there are a lot of questions that are just not even the right question. So part of the benefit of having these core principles is understanding the important questions to ask, and then questions you don't even need to bother answering. And I think, and Jimmy, I mentioned before we hit record, I have observed in the, especially in the physician finance community, because doctors do have this natural like thirst for knowledge and aptitude at acquiring knowledge, and they know how to learn, and are really good at it because they've done it for a long time. There can be an effect where there's this, whereas I think there's a hierarchy of like financial knowledge, there can be a flattening of that hierarchy as you're sort of diving into the blogs and the podcasts, and you don't necessarily have the topographical perspective to say, well, actually, understanding the proper way to execute a backdoor Roth and understanding if I can get a solo 401k plan that allows for a plan loan is not the same as, does not have the same amount of importance and significance in determining financial progress as what if my savings rate is 12% versus 32%.
Mm-hmm.
That is that question, and getting a savings rate that is 32% rather than 12%, it will literally dwarf any other financial consideration that you have in your life and will render them moot. Totally irrelevant. And maintaining that perspective to say, I understand that this is orders of magnitude more important than anything else, and I could literally never go to any of the blogs, I could stop listening to Jimmy's podcast permanently. But if I got my arms around this, then I would be okay. That can get lost.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of counterintuitiveness in personal finance, but there's one reason why, like, the subtitle of The Physician Philosopher's Guide to Personal Finance is the 20% that you need to know to get 80% of the results. And there are certain things that move the needle, and there are certain things that don't, right? One of the things that moves the needle more than anything that you're alluding to is a savings rate. If you save 30% versus 10%, that is going to dramatically impact your trajectory financially. Whereas if you do it backdoor Roth or not, it's not. Like, that's just not going to move the needle enough to like really, really worry about that. But in the financial space, it's all the rage. And people are like, what do you mean you don't do a backdoor Roth, Jimmy? I'm like, I don't know. Like, I didn't see the need for it. And I like the flexibility of a brokerage account. And honestly, is it a little more efficient if I had one? Probably. But it just doesn't move the needle enough to make me care. Right. And so for me, it's all about moving that needle. So I like the way that you're kind of picturing that. And we shared before the show, before we hit record, that it's also very counterintuitive to doctors, right? Like you went to medical school after undergrad, and then you went to residency, and all of that taught you that if you work hard, you can achieve your goals. And working harder in personal finance, particularly as it comes to some of these things that are smaller and moving the needle, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get better returns. It doesn't mean you're going to get a better return on your investment. And so that's very counterintuitive for doctors, I think, because we're just like, the hard work pays off. And that's not always true when it comes to personal finance. Sometimes the things that actually move the needle are not that hard at all.
Yeah. And you've obviously got to start with your goals, because there are certain decisions, and, maybe if we're talking about financial independence and savings rate and other things, you're like, those things aren't as important to me as fill in the blank, the way that you're structuring your life and your existence with your family and the way you spend your time, pursuit of hobbies, travel, etc. And so starting there with the quote unquote first principles, the seismic plates, tectonic plates of what you want your life to look like, and then figuring out what are the couple key pillars. And I do think that you can get to 2 or 3 of them. And I would say, in terms of financial progress, savings rate really does stand head and shoulders above most others. But in the same conversation are like, what part of the country should I live in? What specialty am I going to work? Am I living in the city or in the burbs or in the country? Those types of questions, because then you get into, well, am I spending $2 million for a tiny house or $450 for a 5-bed, 5-bath with 7 acres? And I have clients who do both of those things. And I can tell you that the rate of financial progress is very different between them. But it doesn't mean that either decision is superior or inferior. It just means that the paradigm is different. And those like key financial pillars, where are we going to live? What are we going to do with our time? And then with those decisions, how much of the economic value we're creating can we afford to push towards wealth building? So when I'm talking about a savings rate, I define that as money put towards a wealth building activity, which is paying off debt or building up assets. So we're saving cash, putting money into retirement accounts, doing that backdoor Roth, paying off student loans, paying off car loans. Any of those would be accretive to your savings rate. How much can we push towards a wealth building activity based on the economic value we're creating? And then where does that percentage land us in terms of the progress we want to make? So this is it's obviously a personal conversation, but the longer you wait to do this kind of thinking, and often what you'll find, Jimmy, and I'm sure you've run into this, is you're making these decisions like subconsciously. So you have this values hierarchy. Oh, I would never consider living XYZ, or of course I don't want to do those specialties. Like these two are the ones that I would want to match into. And then once you're, I would never work for that kind of group. I must be in this area, and therefore I'm going to be in a certain type of practice with a certain type of pay scale and a certain type of cost of living. Those values are often baked in. And so the time to question this values construct is as early as possible before it gets concrete. Because once you've been attending for 9 years and you've got 3 kids and they're all entrenched in their, educational experiences, and for you to say, you know what, I'm not going to live here, I'm going to live there, there's a lot to uproot, and that is very difficult and often not worth it.
I feel like you're talking to my personal situation right now. It's getting a little close to home, but no. So big picture, right? The one decision that makes all decisions, and then another thing that you're kind of hinting at, or that's worth discussing at least, is batching your decisions. And so one of the ways that you can do that is, and I've referenced this before on the show, but the 3 Kinder questions to really go through, like, what is important to you? Like, where are you going? What are you doing? What are you trying to accomplish with your life? And those are not financial questions. They just have financial implications, right? What you want to do with your life and why you're doing it has money as a means, but it's not the end itself. And so because of that, you really have to think through those questions, and you can find them, Google them, 3 Kinder questions, Kinder, Kinder, but it goes by Kinder. Never understood that, by the way. But yeah, those questions can help you. And you know what? Print them off, take them on a date with your partner, sit down and talk through them. And in fact, I encourage you to look through them separately and then go on the date and discuss your answers after you've already figured out what your answers are. And if you do that, you're going to get that big picture tectonic plate kind of stuff that you're talking about, Justin, figured out. And it'll allow you to do it in a date. That, of course, is going to be an evolving conversation over the years, but it is a way to batch that financial decision into a single night. And often money dates, similar things like, hey, if things are not going the way that you want, or you got different goals, or you need to re-meet and kind of have conversations to revisit, batch those decisions so that you're having them in one meeting instead of having 47 decisions throughout the day over 2 months, right? So make one decision that makes all the decisions. And then if there are multiple decisions that you need to make, try to batch them together when you can.
And the good news is there's part of this that only you can do, part of this process that only you can handle. And then another part that is delegatable or delegable. I'm not sure what the word is there.
I'm going to go delegatable.
Yeah. And once you know yourself, and I can tell you for clients that I have that they have a high degree of self-knowledge. They know what they want. They don't know all the mechanics. They don't know, should I be max funding a 529 right now? But if an advisor knows them and they know themselves and they can communicate to an advisor who they are and what they want, then an advisor can say, hey, listen, here's the 6 things here's the tools that you may not even know exist, but here's the things you should be doing that are going to reflect the values that you have constructed within your family. So if you're intimidated by, oh my gosh, okay, we got the 2 or 3 pillars that we've made the big life decisions, and now we get to the part of the hierarchy where all of the tactics, the backdoor Roth and the 529 funding, and the do we need a trust for our kid, like all those things, those can, you can sure buy Jamie's book and you should be an informed investor. There is a small percentage of doctors who are equipped to really do that themselves, but this is a part of what professionals will help you with. And if you can communicate to that professional the important parts about who you are, a good advisor is going to be able to draw that out of you anyway. But if you can go in and you know what's important to you and you can put that on 1 or 2 pieces of paper, then a good advisor will say, here's the tools.
Yeah, but I think that's an example of the decision that makes all decisions. Like for me, if I can outsource something that I don't enjoy, I do. We pay $500 a month for our lawn care and, all of the stuff around that makes my pretty flowers grow. I want those things to happen. Do I want to do them myself? Absolutely not. Am I willing to pay $6,000 a year? Apparently, And so I have no issue with that. And I've just made the decision, I outsource things that I don't want to do. And sometimes that means picking up an extra shift, or sometimes that means I need to earn extra money in other ways. Sometimes that means I might have to spend less money in another category I care less about. But what I have decided is that if I can outsource something that I don't enjoy, I'm going to do it. Now, fortunately, it's become less expensive because my father-in-law moved to town in October and he's a handyman. So nice. A lot of those things that I don't like to do are things that he actually enjoys and gives him something to do. So it's been a beneficial relationship. But Yeah, I mean, that is something to consider. Like, what are the stake tables in the ground, right? Like, I'm going to spend money on my kids' activities. I've talked about that on the show before, right? I've already made that decision. If something comes up, you know, big picture decision, like my life, if something is the right thing to do, I do it. Like, I don't care about like, how's this going to happen? I make the decision. It's the right thing to do. I'll figure out the how. And that actually saves from some mental gymnastics I have to do. Like, oh, is this really worth it to do this or do that? If it's the right thing to do, just do it. And so if you find these table stakes for you in your life based on your values and what you want to do, it can help you figure that out. And I think that's important because it minimizes the decisions you have to make down the road.
Yeah. And that's why for me, the savings rate it does stand head and shoulders above the others because it does give you the autonomy, the ability to say, you know what, my kid is going to do one sport and one cultural pursuit at all times, if that was the decision you made. And that way you're not like, oh my gosh, a piano lesson is $75 for 30 minutes. That seems kind of ridiculous. If you can comfortably accommodate that within your free cash flow, then it's not a big deal. You just do the thing that is in accordance with your values and you move on. Or if your friends invite you out to lunch and it's, oh my gosh, that place is kind of expensive and my value is people are important to me. And if I have a free lunch, I'm going to spend that with somebody I care about, which is how I operate. And if you live your life with enough margin, then you can do that in a way that decreases the emotional energy required to live on that kind of plane. But if you make the trade-off decision to live in an area where you have less margin, then it does increase the energy, the emotional engagement required to say, oh my gosh, like this is the third time that's happened this week and I already had 2 lunches out and things are feeling tight. Jimmy, I've had clients that make $500,000 to $700,000 a year who are like, I was a little stressed when I was at the restaurant last week that maybe I had gone to the restaurant too many times this month. And I can tell, like, maybe you can tell that we were a little earlier on in our engagement. I said, my job is to make sure that never happens again. Either because and usually there's just a deficit of knowledge to understand what is the plan, where do you stand? And there's this vague sense of, oh gosh, I feel like I'm gonna slink into Justin's office and he's gonna hit my knuckles with a ruler for eating out too much this month. But that's obviously the last thing I want to do. But the point is you can have a high income and you can still have latent anxiety or emotional stress around these decisions. And often it's as a result of not properly calibrating some of the bigger pillars.
Yeah. And some of those things, savings rate, I think, is really a big take home. And the reason why is because it is the decision that makes all the other decisions. And so if you have a savings rate, you're like, hey, I'm saving 25%, right? And that's financial goal number one. That will happen come hell or high water. I'm saving 25% of my money. And then every other financial decision, like that money's already taken off the table. Like it's not even part of the consideration. You've got this other 75% of your money to make decisions for all the other things we're talking about. And I think that's really important because, you might just say like, hey, I know that even if I have student loans, I've made a decision. I'm going to fill up my 401k every year or my 403b every year because that's important to me and I want to save and I'm trying to build my wealth. And maybe you count your student loan payments towards that savings rate, as you alluded to earlier, things that are building wealth. But that one decision does kind of make all the other decisions. But in order to make that decision, you have to go back up to those kinder questions and say, hey, what age do you want to be financially independent by? Because that's going to dictate how much you need to save each year to get to that goal, right? That has to do with those bigger, ethereal, philosophical questions and that money date that you need to go on with your partner if you're married or with, a best friend if you're single, because it really does make the rest of the decisions.
And this is where a resource like the book we discussed the other day, Die with Zero, which I don't like all the stuff in it, but it does expand your mind in terms of some of the goals and some of the ways that you can build your life in an interesting way, in a personal way that reflects what you want it to look like. You can take some of those ideas because I do think, Jimmy, I probably told you this. My wife and I sat down with a financial planner one time. We were getting a free financial plan from the practice 401k, and I was really just enjoying this interaction. You can imagine as a CFP of 10 years at this time. And
yeah,
this other CFP says, the first question he asks us is, okay, guys, when do you want to retire? And I just thought that is it's such an important part of the relation. Like we're talking about where we're going to go together and you're asking me the most inane question that I have no idea. I'm 30 something and I'm going to work till I die. Like, what do you want here? So starting with those kinds of questions with your partner is probably not the most productive. Obviously, you want to have autonomy and the ability to make decisions that are going to give you flexibility in life. But along the way, you want life to be full of what's important. And you don't need to wait until you're financially independent for that to happen. It can start much sooner than that. But it does require that you create some intentionality around it.
Totally. I mean, that's one of the things that moved our savings rate down, was determining that we wanted to live a little more now and still be able to retire by a reasonable age for us. But that number actually moved backward for us when we kind of sat down and thought about it more thoughtfully. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to the show. Make sure to share Money Meets Medicine with your colleagues and friends in medicine. And don't hesitate to reach out if you have questions, comments, concerns, thoughts, perspectives that you want us to share at jimmy@moneymeetsmedicine.com. We will see you next week. Cheers. Justin Harvey is a certified financial planner at APM Wealth, where he helps anesthesiologists and pain medicine physicians. Dr. Jimmy Turner is a practicing academic anesthesiologist at Wake Forest in North Carolina. He's also a licensed insurance agent. However, either Justin or Jimmy are your financial planner, investment advisor, or insurance agent. This show is expressly for general education and entertainment purposes only. Nothing should be considered financial advice. All views expressed are solely the views of the guests on the show and do not represent the views or opinions of their employer.